Well, what else do I need to say first? Besides the call to order.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay, so we will open the meeting with a call to order. We'll start.
Ann Ellis is here.
Brian Lundgren here.
He Dyson's here.
Dennis Sutherland.
Okay, and then are there any visitors to make note of?
It's gonna bubble up.
Well, I'm Stu Strong, resident of Toledo now, clean resident. And I just say that when I first started out with doing stuff with the city, and I was on the city council. I was on with old Ann there for a long time. And that was a few years ago. And I just kind of give you a little push that when we were on there, we did a lot of weird stuff. And we actually take tours of some of the other municipalities and such on their subdivisions and new stuff that they've done. And I guess from just getting off the city council, I'd just like to ask you, maybe taking a little active role in some of the other planning might help the city council out. And if you could take some of this pressure off of them, maybe we could get some more subdivisions and neighborhoods and such on there. And that's, I guess, what I'd like to push towards you, is to maybe think about that and look at the landscape of Toledo and see if we could get some more things going on here, so we can get the population growing and increase our budget, so then we could keep some stuff in Toledo. So that's my big push. Feel it.
Okay, are there any other visitors?
No, it's online.
Okay, so then I think we move on to the approval of the November 13th minutes. And that's how we didn't have a December meeting.
I didn't, for some reason, when I picked my packet up, and I should have called you, I haven't had a chance to go over them. I hope somebody else has.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll move to approve them.
And after scanning them, I didn't see anything obvious, and I'll second. Oh, maybe he had a chance. These are his. I'll second the minutes.
Okay, so then a motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Use roll call vote or however that works.
I'm not
And
going to, I don't agree.
mixed just showed up. So all in favor of approving minutes? Aye. Motion passed.
No, yeah, the planning commission member Mix abstained.
And then I think the rest is.
Perfect, thank you. So quick updates kind of on the housing code work, and hopefully this answers some of your questions too, in terms of what we're trying to do, but definitely want to kind of continue to work on lots of different efforts to support the city. There's kind of two and I know it's been a little bit because we had a couple of public hearings the last meetings, and we were off in December for the break, but we have our land division code update, and then what we're calling the House Bill 3395 updates. So I want to start with the partition and subdivision, so the land division section in the packet, and hopefully it's outlined in a way that's a little bit easier, but in previous versions, you've seen the actual text changes, the track changes of what's being proposed to be updated in the land division chapter. Overall, the goal can be summarized as trying to have a more simplified process for land divisions and subdivisions. I'll be working with Arlene to get the track changes up on the website by next week for everyone to review. But since the last meeting, there's not really been any substantial changes to the land division chapter. We're still, I will note that for both sections, we're still waiting for DLCD to give us any kind of comments either way. But I'm going to ping them again to see if I can get something. Because overall, our goal is in February, and I'll touch on it a little later, we're gonna kind of focus in on a specific section. In March, hopefully doing a joint work session with city council and then going to hearings in April for approvals, kind of our target timeline there. But kind of focusing in on the partition and subdivision memo. You can kind of see on that first page, there's bulleted summary there. And you don't have to be on the specific section, but I did want to highlight kind of what we had talked about previously, but things like the partition chapter right now. In order to partition a property, so that's splitting it into up to 3 lots, so typically 2 or the 3 lots. Those applications come to the planning commission right now, but the proposal is to change that to where that city manager approval. The standards with those are clear and objective, so it's kind of like you have to meet the size requirements, you have to meet any sort of easement requirements, so it's typically a pretty straightforward application. So those smaller divisions of land would go directly to the city manager, where subdivisions, so 3 and above, those would still come to planning commission. We, as a city, haven't seen a subdivision in quite a while. The most recent, we had a plan unit development of 8 units back in 2006, but that was the last, per se, larger division of land that occurred. And that was on Beaver Street off of East Slope. Those are, at this point, I believe 6 of the 8 lots are now built out. So because just some quick history here, the 2006 just pre-recession, so they didn't actually get built out for a while, but over the last few years, we've actually seen those starting to be built out on the on Beaver Street. So part of this whole goal again is to try and get more people interested in possibly either partitioning their land or subdividing their land moving forward. Other kind of highlights in terms of updates. One kind of change was which we've run into this a lot with other applications as well, is submitting the plat, changing that from 12 months to 18 months for partitions to give more for the subdivision proposals and partition proposals, but the challenge there is we only have a certain number of surveyors out there. Once you get approval, we've often had to extend those partitions because they're waiting on the final surveyor, because they're often 6 to 8 months out. So that timing can be really difficult. So trying to get more flexibility with the 18 months. And then also one thing that we did restructure, try to restructure a little bit, is you get your preliminary plat approval for a subdivision. Say someone comes in and they want to divide 18 lots on their property. So they come in, they get the approval from planning commission. So that's their essentially the preliminary approval, and you have to submit that final plat now within the 18 months. So that once that plat is approved, signed off on, then you have a construction timeline. So those plans would have to be submitted 18 months from the planning commission approval. So trying to streamline that construction plan process, and actually right now, we don't really have a good set outlined process for what Public Works is actually looking for when they're going out to the subdivision, making sure those roads are constructed to Public Works standards, stormwater, water, sewer. So we've created a new code section to streamline how and what Public Works looks at. One other kind of section that we cleaned up a bit was the density standard. If you remember, that was this huge, long, convoluted mathematical equation of how to get to the density standard, but we've updated to that to be a lot clearer in terms of the RS and the RG standard. Each zone have their own density standard, but you don't have to go through this complicated process to calculate what you need to meet. So that change is still the same.
Do you want a particular page?
No, I'm just kind of
Oh, summarizing.
summarizing, yeah, not on a specific page. We'll and if we'll get those, so you can look at it in two different ways, this table, or we'll get those track changes up on the website and notify everyone once they're on the website. You've seen those track changes before, in terms of if there's additional questions with where we're headed. But for the most part, I would say the partition subdivision chapter is pretty locked in to what we've kind of talked about throughout last year. One, I guess, change that we did do after talking to Arlene, we had the 16.30, the adjustments and variances section. So we also have a variance section in our zoning, the chapter in the Title 17. So I thought we could kind of work between the two, but kind of thinking about it more and going back through some case law, it's actually better to have a separate variance section within the partition subdivision chapter 2. I don't anticipate that being used because typically, say, if you wanted more flexibility with your size of lots, you didn't want to meet the minimum lot size standard for RS, you would do a planned unit development where you could propose a smaller lot size. And that's kind of what Beaver Street, what happened there is those are pretty small lots, I think around 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, but they're small lots that were able to be that small because of the planned unit development process. So that's more so the route someone would go rather than the variance, but that option's still available. And otherwise, it kind of minor updates throughout. And some things we didn't touch, if you remember, like transportation facility standards, because we were waiting until we have a new transportation system plan, and that's where we would then make those substantial updates moving forward. So once those were in there. So this is hopefully providing a good summary of where we were in terms of what we've talked about, but again, not changing a lot since what we've previously talked about, and we'll make those track changes. We don't want to give you a gigantic packet at this point because you've seen all of that, but we'll have that available on the website for review, and then have that. We really won't touch on this probably in February, but in March you'll get like a probably more of like a presentation format, so that because council might not be as familiar with the updates, so we'll kind of have to backtrack and do more of a detailed summary, since they weren't in the middle of the updates, like the planning commission members. But any questions on partition and subdivision updates?
This, here it is. I did have one and I didn't have it. I'm pretty sure on 16.08, planning commission approval for partitions. And that gives the approval to the city manager. Is there any notification, because we have that 150 for certain things, like if a partition's, even though it's not gonna come before us, our neighbors still gonna be notified that something,
Yeah, good.
okay,
Good question. It's a type. It's moving from, so type 3, those are the ones that come to planning commission applications. So there's notice to neighbors and then there's the public hearing approval.
right,
The type 2, there's still notice to neighbors,
Okay.
surrounding neighbors, but there's no public hearing process.
Okay.
You, if on appeal of say a partition was approved and under the new process and there was an appeal, it would actually come to the planning commission for that review. Whereas right now, the planning commission would hear it first and then it would go to city council on the appeal, but there's actually another layer of if there is an appeal of that review. So potentially, if someone disagreed, then it could come to planning commission.
nothing wanted to.
But that was a good question. So I'm going to jump to there's the memo, it titled just housing code updates, and I'll kind of walk through this one more so page by page. But on the first page, there's different, so our main focus, and we received the grant, was the House Bill 3395 zoning code updates. So this kind of, we're gonna walk through those in more detail, and then there's one of these bullet points, which is what we'll be talking about more so in February in detail. So the first one, it requires non-metro cities between 2,500 and 10,000 residents to adopt ordinances allowing duplexes. So this is where the city, because of our previous housing code updates, we were actually ahead of the state requirement, and currently in the RS or RG zone, where you can build a single unit dwelling, you can build a duplex. We haven't, since that was adopted, I would say we haven't seen a substantial change in terms of what we're seeing. We're predominantly seeing single unit dwellings and manufactured homes at this point, but it now allows that option for someone. We've had I'd say some initial conversations, but it hasn't, similar to the ADUs, we didn't see like a big jump of all of a sudden it's only duplexes being built in the city, but it provides that flexibility, and being ahead of the requirement, we already meet this, so we're good there. So that one was pretty straightforward. And so the next bullet, so in areas within urban growth boundaries, UGBs, and zoned for commercial use, directs local governments to allow housing units available to those households making 60% of the area median income, or allow mixed use structures with ground floor commercial for those households with moderate incomes, which would be 80 to 120% of area median income. So this is the section where I'm still trying to wrap my head fully around what that looks like. And I'll jump back to it later, but we have a sample in here as well from the city of Bend, what they've tried to do with this section, but I'm gonna skip that for now and then jump back to it. So this next section, it's kind of this long long description here. But it provides local governments flexibility on their required timelines for final action on application for a permit, limited land use decision or zone change, specifically when a local government tentatively approves an application for the development of a residential structure within the UGB. They may extend the deadline 100 days for counties, 120 days for cities, by up to 7 days to ensure sufficiency of the final order. So we already have this. It's a clock essentially for approval of 120 days for applications. That's an existing rule that's in our Title 19 already. But what this is allowing is 7 extra days for kind of finalizing the order. So it's giving that extra flexibility to extend that deadline to make sure everything gets clean. And this is just basically matching what's required by the House bill. In that section, we jump a second, but on page 5 is the 19.24.10, and that's the 120-day rule. And that's where the new language would come in and say a decision involving an application for the development of residential structures within the UGB where the city has tentatively approved the application and extends 120 days by no more than 7 days in order to assure the sufficiency of the final action. So that's mirroring the language from the bill, basically. So that one's pretty straightforward. The next bullet precludes local governments from reviewing and approving condo plats and prohibits any zoning, subdivision, building code, or other regulation that imposes a tax or fee approval process or permitting requirements upon any development of or property proposed as a condo. So this section, we actually don't have a current separate process for condos. Some cities have a long laid out process specifically for condos, so we're meeting this standard here. The next standard talks about single room occupancy developments. And I'll actually read the definition of that too, and that's on page 4. But single room occupancy development means a building with no less than 4 attached but separate single room occupancy units and a shared kitchen or food preparation facilities, sanitary facilities, so bathrooms may be shared or may be provided within or between SRO units. And then a unit, so means an area within the SRO development that is independently rented and lockable and provides living and sleeping space for the exclusive use of the unit occupants. So kind of think of a house that's now has different rooms that are rented out, but that you have lockable space, but then you share bathrooms or kitchen areas. So it's making this sections requiring that to be an allowed option. So if someone did want to do this, they could. We actually, I would say there's a lot of unofficial, probably roommate situations that do occur. So it's not something that the city would even at this point get in the middle of regulating, but they want to make it clear that that's an allowed use within the residential zone. So we're adding a section within the RS and RG zone of outright permitted uses that says single room occupancy units or development. So that makes it clear in those zones that it's an allowed outright use. I don't know how many we'll end up seeing over time, or more so in terms of like, there's a lot of the unofficial ones, like I talked about, that someone might own a house but wanted supplemental income and they rented out one of their rooms in the house. So those are the main House bill requirements related to the zoning. there were also kind of, as we were going through it, we were proposing to clean up some other housing sections as well. You'll see kind of the, I'm not gonna read each of the definitions because we've actually touched on all of these in previous meetings, but there's some new definitions and updated definitions listed. And then on page 4, I'll start kind of going through, just summarizing again the updates to different sections. So the RS zone, if you remember, it'll now be named the standard residential zone, so we can still keep RS, so not to confuse people, but it was single family residential zone, but now it'll be the standard residential zone. We removed the conditional use subsections for manufactured single family homes that do not meet the minimum standards, and then it lists section 1708-90. And those basically we're removing that because there should not ever be a scenario now that a dwelling can't meet those standards, because we're proposing to remove, there was standards of a home must meet one of or 3 of these listed requirements, and it was like gutters, gables, all these different requirements, but we already, through building code, houses are going to have gutters. So we're trying to get less nuanced in terms of that regulation, in terms of that's not necessarily clear and objective, looking at all of some of those requirements. So it's being removed, but it's functionally not creating any, we're not removing an allowed use, because single unit homes and then manufactured homes are still permitted. Single room occupancy development, so I've mentioned permitted. Signs, adding some language for multi-unit dwellings and subdivisions for signage, because we currently don't have any clear language for signage. Added language to allow ADA ramps in the front yard setbacks, so it's not clear right now that that's allowed outright, but we would typically say your house is meeting the front yard setback of 15 feet, but you could have a ramp into that front yard setback to allow for ADA accessibility. And then I mentioned remove design feature standards for single unit homes. The RG standards, very similar in terms of what's being updated for commercial. We reduced the front yard setback standard slightly. And then this next section is where I'm going to get into it in more detail, the religiously owned affordable housing. But then the commercial residential overlay zone, that's the new zone that was created near Beach Street. In that area, it's all zoned commercial, but has been a single unit, also some multi-unit housing for really since it was developed as a zoning code. So this is giving more flexibility for that area to continue as a residential area, because there's not an anticipated additional need for commercial space. Because currently we have other vacant commercial space in the city, and since the 70s, even 70s, that has been a residential neighborhood. The the non-conforming use structures and lots, that language was updated for clarity. Think about for non-conforming, think about something that was built prior to the zoning and now might not be allowed by the zoning now, so it's allowing you to continue that use moving forward, or continue that structure. Right now, technically in that commercial zone, all those homes would be considered non-conforming uses because they're not meeting those current standards. Conditional uses, so this was updating very similar to the survey issue I talked about earlier, but it's sometimes it takes time for whoever gets that conditional use to actually follow through with all the conditions, development. So this is giving 2 years instead of 1 year, and it also adds still that 1 year renewal. So in total, you might have 3 total years. And this would also apply to existing conditional uses that are out there that it might have only had 2 years originally, but updating it so they potentially could get that third year. And then I talked about that 120-day rule standard there already. Okay, so now, and this is where I still need to kind of dive into it more, but we previously on page 7, but chapter 17.38, the proposed section there with religiously owned affordable housing and affordable housing land use. So that section, the purpose of that was to meet the new House bills. But now as I've kind of dug into it deeper, and what you'll see with the Bend update, and ended up, I accidentally cut off a little bit of the language. But the proposal is to have kind of 2 separate sections. So we'll kind of be expanding essentially on what we have currently in the 17.38 chapter. So right now, so affordable housing, we provide a definition of that. So the development is on property zoned for commercial, religious assembly, or public lands, or is owned by one of these, one of the following. So a local or state government body, nonprofit, etc., housing authority. And then we define affordable housing based on AMI, and but this wouldn't apply for certain lots. So if you're in the floodplain, slopes over 25%, can't get water, sewer out to the property, those are exceptions to this rule. But it's basically saying right now, saying a commercial zone property is our code. If you were building market rate units, would require a conditional use application to come to planning commission. But this requirement is saying if it's affordable housing meeting, they would have to show that they're meeting one of these AMI metrics as the applicant, whoever that applicant is, show that they're a nonprofit or meeting one of the other applicable state, local government, etc. So one of those agencies, then they could just have that outright permitted and just go through the building permit process. So if you're affordable housing, you get to skip the conditional use process, because it can often prevent affordable housing from happening, is kind of what again, it's the states, we're trying to meet the state bill. But my understanding is it's allowing those nonprofits to not have to get stuck in that conditional use, because if a city, oftentimes if affordable housing wants to be built in a city, the city has to check and say, this is outright permitted, this requires a conditional use. And if they get like, this requires a conditional use, that might prevent them from even being able to get to that funding piece moving forward. So this is a way to streamline their process. But it's with kind of what you'll see with the Bend example, and sorry that it got cut off a little bit, and I'll clean this up, is there's also there's kind of 2 bills that occurred. There was Senate Bill 8, which you'll see on just draft page 37. So this implements Senate Bill 8, House Bill 2984, and House Bill 3151. And what we've currently structured is actually more related in covering that Senate Bill 8, that section. So as you'll see in this Bend example, income qualified housing. So affordability is defined, and then it talks about, it has the same things listed as ours, the 80% or less of AMI, 60%. So that's all the same of what our proposal is. And then you'll see income qualified housing owned by a public body, and then located in a residential, commercial, or mixed use public works zoning district. And then located in a light industrial. District too, so that's something that's slightly different, we don't list light industrial. And then it has does not apply to lands. The floodplain slopes, so it's very similar to our section. But what I've been trying to parse through, which has been kind of difficult, and what we'll talk about at the next meeting. Is that there's just been all of these different Senate bills, House bills that have all kind of occurred, and it's kind of hodgepodge together what we need to meet. So that's where I want to talk to DLCD and make sure how we're structuring our code is meeting the House bill and Senate bill requirements, but overall, the goal of it. Again, from my understanding of the bills, is that it's trying to make it easier to build affordable housing and give them less hoops to jump through, but still having standards like you don't want it on slopes 25% or higher, or in the floodplain, or specific, or in natural disaster or hazard areas. So there's these exceptions to where if they're in those areas, the city can say no. You might be in that zone, you might be a nonprofit, but you're in the floodplain, so that's in the you don't meet this exception. So I know this section's really confusing, and it's confused me too, and Mike's been very busy lately, so I haven't had the chance to touch base with him either on this specific section. But that's kind of what our entire focus for the February meeting will be, on this section, and we'll come back with a cleaner chapter. And I'll hopefully be able to talk to Mike for a bit on this before the meeting, and then we can have that cleaned up, and that'll kind of be the last little piece of the puzzle for the updates.
Be interesting to know how they decide the AMI on a, is that, I mean, who did 80% of each district, and that can change in a matter of 18 months, with
Yeah.
that'll. Yeah.
So when they say AMI, it's just talking about something that is within our area, like Toledo City, not generally statewide or countywide. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I believe you're.
In the one in Bend, it specifies that it's, around the Bend area. Yeah.
I think
Bend
it's.
Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Just make it easy, won't you?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, who comes up with the numbers?
You'll be a bureaucrat.
Excuse me?
You'll be a bureaucrat, so when I be.
Yeah, it's so, like especially with the fishing industry, I mean, things are can be so variable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think how it would work is that. We would work with the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department, so. Say there was a nonprofit that wanted to come in and build. They could work with OHCS to determine what their current definition is for that area. And then make sure that those rents are serving the target populations of 80% or 60%, whichever one.
It's having to.
But no, this is what I know we've talked about this section briefly before, but it's one I want to kind of focus in on clean up for the next meeting. Any other questions on that section?
It's my own personal opinion, but I can never understand how someone who's at 80% of your AMI can even get a mortgage.
Yeah, no, I think it's a
It's
challenge.
dirt.
I guess I'm interpreting and thinking a lot of this is gonna be rentals, affordable housing,
Yeah.
as rental being housing. Yeah.
And then charge them double the rent.
Well, not according to this, they shouldn't.
Where's it saying anything about it?
Excuse me?
Is it-
Well,
Is it
they're
within-
building housing, they're not specifying that it has to be owner.
Yeah,
It can be
it could be
apart.
either owner occupied
Yeah.
or rentals.
Okay, so if they're talking about affordable housing, do they have control over the rents?
Yeah, there's a section, it talks about a agreement or a covenant.
Where's that?
It's written in there.
In
So you-
section B.
Yeah,
page.
you would have to have an agreement for no less than 30 years, basically, that specifies that you're going to,
I see it.
yeah, rent to one of those 80% or less of area median income, or average of 60%. So that'd be written in the covenant. So when the city's signing off on the approval, they would have to provide that covenant at that time to ensure that they're not rented at market rate, that they're meeting the statute or the code.
When I read that, it doesn't. In the end, what matters is what do the renters, can they afford to rent it?
The state sets the price
Yeah,
for every year, the price is set by the state and how much it goes up. Like a,
as I look at some of those houses that are rented around French Avenue. We're one of the few people that own a house there. And there are rents going on there that should be controlled.
for a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house is $16.50 a month. That's through the state. Section 8,
Could be tough.
and you know, that's if they are paying the utilities.
Who's paying, the renter or the landlord?
The renter,
Yeah, that's
the
what I figured.
state pays it. And then it depends on, you know, kind of what kind of income they have
Okay.
also. It's based on, you know, several criterias.
So the state subsidizing it.
Money that the family has and what they can afford, and are they working or trying to, you know, better themselves and stuff. There's a whole equation there. But it's pretty much 3-bedroom, 1-bath is about 16.5 a month
Total payment from the renter,
from the state.
from the state.
That's for section 8.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Commissioner Dyson, if those on your street, if they're just rented by privately,
Yeah,
then they can rent whatever they can,
Yeah,
whatever someone will pay. But the hope would be if a nonprofit built under this code section, then now they're subject to, for at least 30 years, to renting to the specific income bracket, but
So there's no control over somebody who just builds a house and rents it.
no.
they can only raise it so much in a year.
Oh, yeah.
Rent is.
It's like
10%.
From the state. It depends on what the
you
state
can rate
says.
this.
The year before is 14%, this year is 10%.
Is it 10% this year?
Yeah, the state sets the standards.
Yeah.
But then you don't have to raise it at all. If you've got good renters, it's better to go down than up, so they stay
Yeah.
Yeah,
or keep it the same. If you got, you know, I mean, it's your choice. They're good, you wanna keep them. So better to.
okay, thank you.
But That's probably, yeah, that's what we'll be talking about next month in more detail.
And like, where we're getting at, where we're doing now is this stuff is way advanced in what we got here in Toledo. We don't have people renting out 4 bedrooms. That's like college town stuff. We have none of that stuff here. Ain't nobody. There might be, but I really doubt it. I don't know of anybody renting out bedrooms. Maybe there might be some of that in Newport where there's, they host like, your the person that does physical therapy on you. There might be 3 or 4 therapists renting one place out or something and renting bedrooms out or something, because there's no housing. They might be sharing, they might have to deal with some of this stuff, but I don't think we're dealing with that here. But this is some of the stuff that's going to happen most likely years down the road.
Yeah.
Probably we won't deal with it in our term, but
Well, it will be different.
most likely. So, this is definitely a problem here that we might see, but then again, city manager's going to deal with it. We're just handing it all to the city manager. So, everything here, basically city manager, city manager, city manager, city manager, and then, so everything's referred back to 16 and city manager. So might as well be walking down the sidewalk. The city manager will handle it from here on out. Right? That's what.
For going back to the subdivision section, subdivisions, so more than 3 units in terms of a subdivision, that would still come.
There's gonna be some stuff trickle down.
Yeah.
But
That'll
just advise, he still hasn't. Well, planning commissioner does and city manager. We're still walking the same blind dog.
I have a blind dog that does agility really well.
Unless you move the furniture. Yeah, I've got one too, that looks like a spawned out salmon.
That visitor maybe have a comment.
Just a couple of questions if I could.
Yeah.
The issue with the changing the nonprofit, churches and such, would they be included in that?
Yes.
Because, we do have a couple of churches here with
That's the
some
microphone.
pretty good sized property, and if they knew that they could put some affordable housing or something on there, they might be wanting to do that.
Yeah, they would count, I think a nonprofit organized as a religious corporation, so I think they would fall within that, the definition.
Yeah. Another question I had was with these duplexes and such on there, or rooms in houses, is there a anything in there that goes with, if you're gonna rent out rooms in a house that addresses that parking issue? Because sometimes, we get a little problem with, you have 4 rooms and different people in there, and all of a sudden, they've got, cars all over. And I didn't know if that was, that particular issue was addressed in that section.
No, that's a good question on duplexes. So duplexes require 3 parking spaces, where manufactured home or a single unit dwelling would require 2. So in the new development, you'd have 1 additional space at least. A property owner could build more if they wanted to, but 3 is the minimum. For the single room occupancy units, there's no how our code currently is written. So if there's, say, an existing, because it'd be existing dwellings that are being converted, the parking, we don't have anything that would trigger more parking requirements. And I need to look into it more, and I don't think we could require more. Someone could provide more. It's similar to when we did our ADU, the accessory dwelling unit standards. New ADUs, they can't require an additional space. Someone could provide an additional space. So it's kind of a similar language there, but I think in certain instances, you're right, that there could be a house that ended up with four. Where you might have park, depending on the street that it's on, there could be parking challenges, which I think we could address some by talking to the applicant or. But I need to look into if we could require spaces on the SROs.
I just, since we're kind of going down this road and such on there, it might be, that's what I was just thinking was it'd be a good time to look at that. A lot of times that if somebody's putting in these units, the place where they're gonna park their cars might not be on that same little plot, but it could be maybe a different little site that they had,
Yeah,
but yeah.
Ron Bush should have the answer to that. He's our code enforcement officer.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I don't see him that often.
no, we don't. Yeah. He'll just tell you.
He's always out in Siletz.
Yeah, and he'll just tell you it's a civil matter. But yeah, he should provide you with that information.
They're just,
yeah, that's all I had there.
does that mean we're moving on to discussion items?
So the building permit and land use application table, we provide this every 6 months. But of the current activity for last year is all included here, so we kind of provide this, I mean. Answer any questions right now, or if at the next meeting you're looking at this list, you have a question that comes up, we can answer a question on a specific permit. This is kind of provided as informational of what's ongoing in the city right now. If and answer any initial questions that there were, but definitely take a look at this on your own time, and if at the next meeting or in between meetings, feel free to reach out to Arlene or I, and we can answer questions on a specific permit. What we see often is sometimes like when someone submits a home, it can often, take months before it actually gets built. So some of these that might have been submitted towards the end of the year might not be building until it gets a little bit drier potentially. So sometimes that timeline of development can take a while, but it's kind of what's been submitted to the city, but kind of that on the ground development could take longer. Any questions? Otherwise, I have a couple others kind of staff updates too that are in the discussion items.
I had it goes back, I know it stopped because the work stopped, but at 1103 Northwest A Street,
Yes.
they got a building and then it unfortunately was just a sad sack of a place, and they have a work stop, and now it's being braced up. Do you know if anybody, what's gonna happen with that building?
What was the address?
It's at the end of A Street, across from the church. There's a church at the end of A Street. Kind of catty corner.
Yeah, it looks.
Well,
You can't miss it.
no, you can't miss it. The problem is that it's looking, to my eye, like a potentially dangerous
It
building.
looks like it moved to me, kind of downhill on that backside. So.
Yeah, and so I'm just alerting that, and I haven't, you've seen some activity and then there's no activity. But, boy, you could go in there with a sledgehammer and take a corner out really easy.
I've never seen it done that way.
Yeah,
It's a sad sack, and I'm sure there's all sorts of speculation. My concern is the building as it stands now.
But yeah, it should
So
be
whether,
chain link
whether or
fence off,
not
there
it's,
should be.
it can be, it looks like it needs to come down before it falls down,
kids
hopefully
playing
not
in there.
on somebody.
Chainsaw.
Yeah, it's.
I think you
I
lean
wouldn't- I
against
wouldn't
it.
get- Yeah, whatever, I'm just mentioning.
No,
it to pass
I
along.
agree. So they did, you're right, that so they originally submitted the foundation permit, the rehab, it's a quadplex, there's 4 units.
I was wondering
There.
why there were.
So there's 4
Is it on
units.
this list?
Yeah.
Yeah, back in May is when they got there.
Yeah, it's actually in October too, there's a second
Oh,
permit,
okay.
10/22/2024 for the repair of framing, siding and roof. So they got a stop work order because they needed the additional permits for the framing, siding, roof, because the original one was just the foundation. As far as we know right now, they still are trying to move forward. But it's kind of not moved very fast. We had talked to Ron, and Ron was gonna try and catch them when someone was out there and talk to them, but we'll flag it again. And then I think that's a valid point about some sort of possible barrier.
It'd just be so easy for some kid to go running in there chasing something. That's my,
They must have just not noticed it happening that way.
excuse me?
Must not have noticed it happening that way. He'd been working on it since.
Yeah,
They're
well,
on.
they went in stages and it looked pretty good, and then all of a sudden, it just, I think I've been there. They got so deep into a house that they realized, oh.
So it's toward now.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
bank
yeah,
was
they
trying
do
to
in
sell
the
it for
first
quite
place.
some time.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, I'm just mentioning that.
No, thank you.
Just from a safety point of view.
The other update, so you probably got an email that, so January 15th, there's a training, that, and the deadline to sign up is Friday, of this week, so next week on Wednesday, it's on Wednesday, right? Got my days right, yeah, Wednesday the 15th, there's a training at the fire station that, you are all welcome to, attend.
What time is it?
Are they
9:30,
9 in the morning?
yeah, I want to say it's 9:30 to 3:30.
Whoa,
There are 2 sessions,
oh, okay.
morning
Yeah.
session and afternoon.
And if I think you could attend. A portion of it. if
Yeah,
you-
one session or the other. I think ethics, government ethics, I think is the morning session. And meetings law is the afternoon session. You could choose one or the other or both.
And then, so I guess we encourage, if you have time, everyone to sign up for that. Other updates, so or I guess we skipped December, but in November, there were 2 hearings, the zone change comp plan. Change application. So that, and then the psilocybin. Code updates, so both of those were approved by council and went through the appeals process timeline, so we didn't receive an appeal on those. That ended, I think, just before Christmas. It was either just before or just after Christmas. So those are approved, so the psilocybin ordinance is currently active. Like kind of I said it during the meeting, no one came knocking on the door right when the timeline hit. But that's kind of where we're at with those, is that it's approved. And I think Commissioner Mix, you presented at the council meeting briefly, and an update on the 1,000-foot standard. Council decided to keep that for now. That was kind of one of the questions that was brought up during both meetings. Now, any questions on those 2? Just want to keep you updated on, so you know what happens to the applications after you approve them or deny them, whatever happens. And then the last update, we had questions. I think Commissioner Sutherland, you had some questions on the Arcadia Park. We wanted to circle back to those. I talked to the Public Works Department. So the bathrooms right now, they should allow access from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And they altered the timeline of access predominantly because they had some vandalism problems, it sounds like. So that's why it's just 7 to 5 right now.
Yeah, I went and checked like a day or, I think it was the following day and the day after that, and they were unlocked.
Okay,
That's like, prior to that though, they were locked all the time.
okay,
You know, I'm glad you did ask, but then they were all of a sudden being unlocked now. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My grandkids use that park all the time.
Mhm.
And they were locked all the time, so, but me saying something, then they become unlocked.
thank you
So,
for bringing that up.
Yeah, that worked out fine. Appreciate that.
And then I think you had a couple other questions. So the tire swing there that I think I don't have an immediate update, but that's something that has been brought up internally too in the Public Works Department. So I don't have an final outcome on that, but it is something that's been flagged. And then the other one was power washing certain areas.
Yeah, all the play equipment, they never touched it this year.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the best place. So actually with we have a new, so if you go right onto the homepage of Toledo's homepage, one of the icons that you can click is a Public Works request form.
I have a
And
little better use of my time than it.
and I can ask
Yeah, they can,
Brian too.
if he can't do his job, he needs to move on down the road.
And I think he asked me for follow-up in terms of if there was a specific, so it sounds like it's the play equipment that needs
All of it, yeah.
everything.
Mhm.
Okay. And that was,
Yeah.
I couldn't remember from the meeting.
Yeah, no,
It was-
it doesn't take much. I mean, I got some real nice equipment I've loaned to him or any of the maintenance people to use. So I won't give it to them, but,
And I think they have
yeah, they
Yeah.
do. It's some really nice stuff. So, yeah.
I'll flag that to him again, because I think the question was like if there was something specific, but it's the play. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
green algae, where the kids are not getting it on their hands, that's the stuff that's not there. But everywhere else it is,
Okay.
yeah. Since it's rained a lot now, you can probably go down, first one down or first one run around is gonna have nice good green algae on it. So, I'm sure there's a home remedy of maybe vinegar or something that would treat it, that's not, chemical or something. So,
No, thank you again for bringing those.
Yeah.
Those up to
it's
us.
brought to his attention, that's a good start.
Those. I'm not missing anything. I really think that's hopefully everything. That's all I think for staff comments. If there's any commissioner, other comments?
Is that it then?
That's like-
That's it. It's adjourned.
Yeah.